Your Humanities Half-hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafadez and Tiro, welcome to Your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry. Today we're talking science on the show. Yes, science as related to the humanities and specifically ocean science as it relates to you and me. Our guests today are Steve McKagan of the CNMI NOAA Field Office and Kaylie Anne Costa, a NOAA Hollings scholar. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kat.
So we all see the reef out there. Most of us really never go there unless we're fishermen. And today we're talking about coral. Why would, say, for example, a general maintenance worker at a local business be interested in hearing about what's happening on the reef?
Of course. So corals really help support our economy here in the CNMI, not only through tourism, but also through property values, through recreation, also from fishing and having that kind of income. So they're really important to everyone here in the CNMI.
Yeah, one of the things we've learned about recently, too, is how important they are for coastal protection. So things like storms can really be abated. The wave energy can really be controlled a little bit if you have healthy coral reefs. And that's something that we're all really familiar with now, I think.
This is kind of out of the box, but did we see any significant impact to the reef after U2?
So most of the impacts that we saw from U2 appear to be from marine debris. And what we're still seeing on the reef right now is a lot of green debris. So there's still a lot of branches and stuff out there. FEMA actually funded a project through the CNMI agencies to remove a lot of the building materials out of the lagoon. So you may have a few months ago seen big piles of building materials along the shorelines. And that was the fire department, CNMI DFW led that effort, and I think they did a really good job. But we still see a lot of trees and stuff out there.
That is very true. On a broader scale, a lot of us read or hear in the news about global warming. And Kaylie, you recently presented on this project, and I was astonished at the statistics that were shared about coral bleaching here in the CNMI. We don't hear much about it locally, Steve. How bad is it?
We've had 3 major bleaching years since 2013. And our cycle tends to be just a little bit off of the global cycle. So if you're reading about issues that are in the Caribbean or other places that get a little more coverage than we do, it might not be the same year that we had an issue. For us, it was 13, 14, and 17 were the big years. And in 13 and 14, folks may remember if you were out in the lagoon, it felt like a bathtub, like you were out there in a hot tub, and it was just kind of gross. Like you didn't even want to go out there in the summer because it was so warm. And that bleached a lot of our Staghorn corals, those ones that look like deer antlers out there in the shallow waters of the lagoon. So we had major losses there in 13 and 14. And then in 17, the warm waters actually really affected our fore reefs, so our deeper slopes, down to maybe as much as 80 feet. And we lost 90% of our branching acroporas and 60% of our branching posloperas and a lot of our other species as well. So a lot of the places where some of our fishermen like to go don't look the same. And if you get a chance to ask your brother, uncle, or auntie, or anybody who goes out there fishing, ask them how much it's changed. And I bet they'll be able to tell you that even in the last 3 years, it's been dramatic.
Can you quantify any of those years with a percentage just to give us a perspective?
Yeah, so in 17, we think on the fore reefs, it was a 90% loss of our branching acroporas. So acroporas are one of many genuses of corals that we have here, but they're some of the most beautiful and some of the ones that people are most familiar with. And then our posloperas, we lost 60% in that 1 year. So.
Wow, and that is a real eye-opener and kind of scary. But Kaylie, you've helped initiate a project that hopefully is a little light on the horizon to deal with this. I would say it's a tragedy. It sounds like a tragedy without having seen it. Tell us about the project.
For sure. So we're building a coral nursery out in the MPA in the lagoon, right on the corner of the Managaha MPA. And what we're trying to do is we're taking pieces of corals that are in the lagoon and on the fore reefs, and we're growing those pieces, and we're hoping to eventually put those back on the reef so that we can kind of boost the corals that we have now and definitely increase those numbers to kind of combat that bleaching that we've been seeing.
So growing coral, like you should be a grandparent by the time this actually happens, or?
Actually, no. So these corals will be, two of the species that we're using will be able to be outplanted in about 6 months.
Wow.
We're going to first refragment our pieces so that we have more to outplant, so we probably won't outplant till closer to a year. But the branching corals actually grow fairly quickly.
Now, the coral that you mentioned that we lost about 90% of, Steve, is that one of the ones that you're growing, or
yes,
we're growing in the nursery?
Of that genus, we have 5 species. All of our 5 nursery species are Acropora.
Okay, tell us a little bit about the process. Like, how did you choose the coral? How did you, and what does this nursery look like?
For sure. So underwater, it kind of looks like Christmas trees almost. They're made of fiberglass. They have all of these arms sticking out in 4 directions, and they hang. Corals hang almost like ornaments from little fishing line loops. We chose the corals from priority sites. We tried to get as healthy and as big of parents as we could so that we're not doing any damage to our reefs as we try to rebuild them.
Okay, so how's it going, basically?
It's going really well. So far, we have 100% survival, so all of our little coral babies are out there doing really well, so we have high hopes.
This is actually her last work day here, her and Amy, who I think is going to be talking with you a little bit later. They're both Hollings scholars who came out. This is the first time we've had the NOAA Hollings program in the CNMI ever. And these are students who are selected by NOAA across the country. There's 150 total. And they get scattered around with various NOAA PIs to support projects. And so this is the first time we've had Hollings scholars out here for this 9-week field season. So it's very fast. We have to have a project ready to go. We get them here. We get them in the water collecting data and doing a bunch of work and support them as much as we can. And I think we had a good year. We're hoping that we'll bring Hollings scholars back, and maybe next year Kat will come back in here with 2 new scholars to talk about what they've been up to. But as far as coral selection, I just want to highlight one. We picked one of the coral species in the CNMI that is also listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened. So we just had a bunch of corals petitioned a couple years back, and a few of them in our region actually ended up being listed, which means they get extra protections from the federal government, and one of those is Acropora globiceps. And so we chose... In layman's terms, these corals are protected in the same way like sea turtles are, or marine mammals, so they have federal protections on them, and they're highlighted, and there's opportunities to get extra funding to work with them and stuff like that. So we picked one of these species, but because we picked a species that's on this list, we had to jump through a lot of extra hoops in terms of permitting and getting clearances to touch them and break them and all that stuff. And so we are the first, actually, in the entire Pacific to work with a listed coral. They've been doing work with listed corals in the Caribbean for quite some time, but little old CNMI on Saipan is the first place. It's not Hawaii or Samoa or Guam or anywhere else. It's us to work with these species in a coral nursery situation.
Could you give us the common names of these species?
So the only common names I think that people would be aware of are the Staghorn Corals, which I mentioned earlier. It's the ones that kind of look like deer antlers, and that's actually a complex of 4 or so different species of Acropora.
Oh.
And then the globiceps, I can tell you what they look like. They're like little digits. They're like your fist if you put all of your fingers together from both hands. They're almost that size, and the fact that they're digitate, and they have little coralite lumps along all the sides that are relatively even in their distribution, and they're relatively light in color, so they're not like bright orange or anything. They tend to be like a light brown when they're healthy, and obviously like a bright white when they're bleached. So Acropora globiceps. If you just type globiceps into a search engine, you'll probably get it to pop up if you folks online want to see what it looks like.
Well, from your description, I already can figure out what the staghorn coral is. I've probably seen it before. Kaylie, so has it all been like easy? You made it sound really easy in your public presentation last week, like everything was going great. Have you had any challenges?
Anytime you come to a new place and start a new project, there's always challenges. I've never built a tree from scratch before, so learning how to work all the power tools, how to...
you had to do that.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So I drilled lots of tiny, tiny little holes for these corals. Finding the right corals that look healthy enough that we want to bring them into the nursery after all this bleaching. But overall, it's gone as best as we could imagine, and it's definitely been an amazing experience.
So it is going to take a little while, but not as long as I thought, to make this happen. But what is the big What would be next? After how long do we have to wait for these corals to continue to grow? And then what's the plan after that?
So we have for the fastest growing ones, we have about 6 months until we can basically fragment them or piece them into two, so that we'll have more corals in the nursery, and then about that same time until we can put them back out onto the reefs. But in that time, we hope to add more trees so that we can have more corals and we can have a bigger impact on our reefs and making them more healthy.
Do you think this is something that's going to continue?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kat. So what we've done here now is set up a little pilot nursery with 10 trees, right? And those 10 trees hold as many as 1,000 coral fragments, which sounds like a big number, except the problem is so huge, right? We're talking about a 90% loss of these species across our 4 reefs and maybe more in the lagoon. So 1,000 little fragments doesn't actually even make a dent. So what they've had to do to scale up these efforts in places like the Caribbean is keep adding more and more trees and also diversify their approaches by including things like tables and rope nurseries and all kinds of variety, so that you're diversifying the types of corals, the different species, and the way in which you're trying to grow them out to figure out what works in your place, because every place isn't the same. We're unique from the Caribbean and even from Guam. So trying more and different things and expanding. We've got funding already to add 10 new trees next year to our nursery. There's also funding within the local agencies, contract being managed by BECQ, to do a different approach in another location. They haven't decided yet, but they'll be funding next year and another set of dive teams out there doing other nursery work. So in parallel, we'll try to learn from each other and partner. But to catch up with the Caribbean, they have coral nurseries that have as many as like 300 or 400 trees in them.
Wow.
We have 10. And it takes about 30 minutes to clean a tree from the amount of algae that will grow on it in the course of like 3 to 4 weeks.
So you got to clean them.
You got to go out there and clean them. So cleaning 10 trees times 30 minutes, that's like 5 hours of effort or something like that for a single diver. So you want to go out there with a team. Imagine 300 trees. We're going to need help.
Yeah. Do you need help if people are interested, if not at this stage, in the future?
I think we're definitely going to need help. The challenge here is that we're in the water, right? We're underwater. So you really need to have people who are divers. And it's not that much fun, really, to be down there.
Cleaning algae.
Yeah. It's like, do you want to go wash your car underwater? Does that sound like a good time? So you need people who are dedicated and willing to, look at it in the long view, because I think as people stay out there and they get to watch them grow and they get a little ownership of them if they're part of this process, then it will excite them to go. But if you're just going out once and you're just with a scrub brush, it's going to be a hard sell.
Definitely. So are there any final thoughts you'd like to share before we go? Oh, sorry. I have a final thought. What are some of the practical things, we may have heard them before, but just remind us again what people can do to help protect our valuable coral reefs?
So waste management is a really big problem. So just keeping the litter off the beaches, disposing of your trash in the best way possible, trying to reduce your plastic use so that there's not so many things going onto our reefs so they can stay nice and healthy.
Yeah, one of the things that we've shifted from as we're starting to do restoration is managing for more local stressors. And so those are typically things like nutrients in the water, sediments that enter the water. If you've got too much fishing happening and you don't have enough natural herbivory to keep the ecosystem kind of healthy. So, if you've got an opportunity to not rinse nasty stuff on your sidewalks that will enter the reef, or if you've got a way to somehow contribute to improving permitting or enforcement of rules that we already have on the books so that we don't have as much stuff entering the reefs that stresses these guys out, any of those kind of things really help.
And if I remember correctly, you said 90% of the Staghorn coral was bleached just a few years ago, correct?
In 2017, it wasn't just the staghorns, it was all the branching acroporas.
That's just a figure we should all keep in mind when, as you said, we think about what we can do personally in our personal capacity or official capacity to help protect the reefs. Any final thoughts?
Just thank you for having me here, and thank you to everyone on Saipan. I've had the most amazing summer, and I couldn't have done it without all of you.
And Steve, if people are interested in finding out more about this project or the next one we're going to talk about, how can they contact NOAA?
Yeah, both of these projects actually have story maps. So they're interactive online maps that people can go click through to learn more and see more, videos and pictures of all this stuff, which are really cool. The story maps are less about words and more about letting you see what's happening, which is a great way to communicate. So we'll share that information. The URLs are available, but they're a little bit clumsy to share on radio. So feel free to give us a call at the office, 234-0004 or 234-0005.
Awesome. Our guests for this half of the show have been Kaylie Anne Costa, a NOAA Hollings scholar, and also Steve McKagan of the CNMI NOAA Field Office. Thank you so much for your time and for your great work.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more after this break.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizuus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half-hour. In this half of the show, we have joining us Robbie Greene of the NOAA Coastal Conservation Liaison, and also Damie Steward, another NOAA Hollings scholar. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Damie, your presentation was interesting because I've actually encountered this species that you're going to talk about. In fact, it freaked me out because I've never seen that at all growing up here. What was it you've been studying here in the Marianas?
Sure. So I've been studying the striped eel catfish. They first arrived in Saipan in 2005. They were identified in a DFW report, Department of Fish and Wildlife. And since then, no studies have ever been conducted here. So we really wanted to understand how many species, how many fish we have here, and just understand their distribution and just really what are they doing here in the lagoon. So we started off with a social science study and interviewed local officials and government agencies regarding their knowledge of the catfish and different fishermen. And from there, jumped into the field aspect where we actually went in the field and surveyed the catfish along the lagoon.
I remember the first time I saw it, I was watching the sunset at PIC, and I saw the shadow coming up into the light. First, I thought it was a manta ray because it's about the, maybe a stingray, a small eagle ray. It was about the same size, very dark, and then it started doing this funky motion, and I went down and I was like, "What is that?"
Yes.
Robbie, what was your experience encountering the catfish?
I've seen them a number of times. It's always right along the shoreline, in the shallows, and they have a very unique behavior. I don't think anyone's ever seen that many animals move in unison like that before. It's pretty spectacular, and we've heard stories from a few folks that spend a lot of time in the lagoon that if you drop a very uniquely shaped item down to the bottom in front of them, like a boot, they will actually kind of mirror that shape. We did not test this out. But
yeah, Damie was only here for a certain amount of time. We couldn't test that part. So what exactly did your study hope to accomplish?
So as I said, no studies have ever been conducted on the species in the CNMI. So we really just wanted to understand, where are we seeing the species? How many do we have? Do they have any specific habitat preferences? To just really have this general understanding so we can move forward and with further studies compare, have they moved? Are there more? And just really have this baseline study. And we were able to understand habitat preferences. We kind of have these hotspots where we tend to see the catfish, both juveniles and adults. And that'll really help in the future if we want to do further study, actually understanding their impact on the lagoon.
So what have you discovered about how many there are and where they're at, what they're doing?
Sure. So they definitely have these habitat preferences in very large sand beds right offshore. You can be in less than 2 feet of water just walking along the beach in the morning and you'll see them. They kind of tend to be out in the morning and evening time, middle of the day. They tend to kind of hide. They like these artificial structures kind of underneath a log or underneath some rocks, kind of hidden from everything. You can find them in the seagrass beds, the really tall seagrass. You'll find them schooling in there in this very distinct schooling pattern we've talked about. And in terms of abundance, we're really just kind of figuring it out. We've discovered that they have a limited home range. So if you go back to the same piece of line that you found them hiding under the one day before, you can go back. They're likely going to be there. So we usually see them several times at the same location. So that helps to better identify how many we have. We don't necessarily have a number, but we have a general idea of maybe how many schools we've seen, and I'm sure there's many we haven't seen. It's only been 9 weeks. So
I'm sure one of the questions people want to know is, are they dangerous, and are they either to humans or to other species?
Sure. They are certainly venomous. They have a venomous spine in their dorsal and pectoral fins. They will not attack you. They're not going to come bite you. If you handle them in any way, if you catch them possibly, when handling them, you definitely need to be aware of the spines and be careful not to be poked. Similar to a lionfish, just when handling, be cautious, but there's no need to be afraid of them. They're no way dangerous, and they won't come after you. They're, as we said, quite beautiful to watch in this very distinct schooling pattern. And
creepy is the word I would use.
Yeah. After a couple hours, I kind of like watching them. They're very fun, but
they kind of seem like more eel than fish.
Yeah, they
times.
definitely are.
True.
Their tails kind of get to you after a while.
Do we know if they're having any impact on other local species?
So that is one of the primary purposes of this study. Is we have to understand that base behavior before we can continue monitoring. Take a look at change over time, not only with catfish, but with other species. So we don't have enough information yet to actually talk with any confidence about their interactions, but that's certainly something we'd be really, really concerned with, because, I mean, Saipan Lagoon, in some respects, is a closed system. So you have something in there that's potentially invasive, interacting with other species, and you could, potentially change the dynamics of the lagoon.
Do we have any ideas at this point what they're eating?
From different studies that have been conducted before, they tend to eat crabs and worms and small crustaceans that are in the sand and algae. And from following them throughout the lagoon, you will see them going, kind of digging through the sand, picking up bits, spitting it out. Same thing in the algae. So we can assume that they're eating those based on studies, but we have not directly looked at this here in Saipan.
As you said, this is kind of like the first baseline study that's been done on them. I think another question people want to know, knowing that catfish is served on many menus, is, are they edible? And how big do these fish get?
You can see them ranging anywhere from an inch with the juveniles. You can also see them up to 14 inches. The adults can be quite large. The average adult size that I've seen, however, have been about 8 to 10 inches, and you can eat them. I've heard of a few people eating them here in Saipan. It's not very common, I think, because people aren't quite sure what this weird eel fish is we're seeing.
Yes.
And again, you have to be cautious with the spines, but there are certainly people who eat them, and I've heard that they're not too bad.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that was one of the unique things that came out of all those interviews we did with folks was, we heard that there are a few folks that will eat them. And it may be limited to different, cultural groups. We heard someone had speared a few of them, but there was no way they were going to eat them, but they were able to give them to another group of folks who definitely would, and...
Yeah.
I met a lady who, I guess her son is a Talaza fisherman, and I also started asking the fishermen, like, hey, have you guys seen this weird fish? And she said that when her son catches them, she just tells him to, like, put them in the garden to fertilize the plants. So maybe this is really a good eye-opener that maybe in potential might be another food source. And how do you think they got here in the first place, being an invasive species?
So they're unlike other fish on the reef in the sense that they lay their eggs in nests on the reef. So it's unlikely that a current or storm brought in the juveniles. It's possible that someone had it in their aquarium and decided to release the fish, and that's kind of how it started. But beyond that, we're not really sure how. The aquarium seems most likely. Yeah,
that was one of the questions we asked in interviews, was if anyone had any information about, when they first saw them or maybe how they arrived. But I mean, you think about all the restaurants in Garapan that
with
serve
live fish,
and it's like, I wonder if someone just brought some in as a food source or something.
Yeah.
Something that would, easily propagate. But
do we have any issues with other invasive species in our waters that you're aware of?
crown of thorns?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one to really highlight, and something that we've been seeing just over the last few months down on Rhoda, is the crown of thorns starfish.
Yeah.
That starfish can do huge amounts of damage to the reef.
Is that something that used to occur here naturally and now it's suddenly prolific, or there just seems to be more of it at this time?
It kind of pops up. It spikes, and there is some data to suggest that after large disturbances like typhoons, they're kind of like opportunistic, or there can be outbreaks of crown of thorns after typhoons. So the outbreak that we saw on Rhoda would actually kind of confirm that. But yeah, I mean, they're found all over. It's just that at certain times their population explodes and they just start eating the reef.
So what can we do about that locally? I mean, like, you're not supposed to disturb anything on the reef. Does that include crown of thorns?
Yes.
Okay.
So there are ways of it's basically control by lethal injection. There's a very specific way to eliminate the starfish, and it requires dive teams going out that are specially trained in injecting. Otherwise, you try and kill a the starfish have always been a tricky problem for people. Back in the old days, boats would, haul in starfish in their nets, and to try and get rid of them, they'd cut them in half. And then
you have two.
Yeah, and then you have two. So, it's a really difficult problem. So I think one of the ways we could address that is actually having sort of training programs for folks to learn how to actually control and manage outbreaks.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Even in the last few weeks, diving at Grotto, you've just seen an increase. I've only been here for 9 weeks, and initially I'd see 1 or 2, and now every time I go, it's 15 or 20. Just in 9 weeks, there's been a huge influx in the amount of crown of thorns.
But if we did find that the catfish was an invasive problem and negatively impacting a lot of the non-invasive species, I mean, we'd have to think about a very different management control. Maybe we'd have to market it as a new food source or fertilizer.
Well, that's a great segue into where do we go from here with this baseline study. Is the NOAA office planning on anything next step for studying this catfish?
We just had that discussion this morning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it would be great to continue this study, better understand their actual impact. I think they haven't been here forever. They've only been here for the last 15 years or so, and I think with this, you can really move forward and better understand their impact. I will no longer be continuing on this project. I have to go back, but it's been a wonderful time, and I'm excited to see where this catfish project goes, and whoever takes it on next, I'm really excited to see what they're able to accomplish from this initial study.
Yep. So we plan to continue having scholars rotating through the NOAA office here on Saipan, and I think that next step, now that we know where the fish are and a little bit about their behavior, it really is moving on to looking at their interactions with other fish. So.
By the way, do we have any idea if there are any of these on Tinian or Rhoda?
We have not heard any reports on Tinian and Rhoda.
Okay.
And the fact that they are pretty much confined to the Saipan Lagoon, we've heard a couple reports of maybe over in Lau some sightings, but the lagoon's such a unique ecosystem, it's not really replicated elsewhere in CNMI, so be surprised.
So definitely let's try to keep it that way, and until we know more about this fish and how exactly it's impacting the environment, just like don't plan on taking it anyplace live. If you want to try eating it, watch out for the spines. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts before we go?
I really want to thank the NOAA Hollings program just for sending some scholars out here. But no, everyone we interviewed was incredibly gracious with their time. I've done a lot of interviews for social science over the years, and a lot of times it's kind of trudging through an interview and really trying to drag information out of folks. And this was a really pleasant experience. People were really, really excited to share all the information they had, and we heard some really great stories. So definitely everyone who contributed valuable knowledge.
Awesome.
Absolutely. BCQ, DFW, Fury and Associates. It's just been a wonderful experience. Everyone's been so helpful. Everyone at the NOAA CNMI Field Office, they've just really welcomed us and made us feel at home here on Saipan. I couldn't be more grateful.
Well, thank you both for your time today and for the work that you're doing to help protect our lagoon, coral reef, and ecosystem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Our guests today have been Damie Steward, a NOAA Hollings scholar, and also Robbie Greene, NOAA Coral Conservation Liaison. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.